the Q&A later to record everybody's comments, and also for anyone who can't attend either the meeting tonight or the meeting next week, so that they can have access to the presentation and also to the Q&A that we're going to do. All right, so welcome. Thanks very much for coming this evening. So this is the first of our first two consultation meetings. So tonight and then next Tuesday, they're going to be the same. Somebody's not muted. They're going to be the same as each other, so they'll have the same content. So if you did sign up for both, they will be exactly the same. All right, so this is today's agenda. So we'll just do some background on heritage conservation districts in Ontario for those of you who aren't really familiar with them. I'll let you know sort of how they came about, what kind of things they do, some examples of some other ones across the province. We'll talk about the Old Mill Heritage Conservation District study itself, on the background and the process we're going to follow. We'll be looking at some community engagement, so what kind of things you can expect to be involved with over the next number of months. And then we'll have our Q&A session at the end where you can ask any questions that you might have, either that you thought of before or that come up during the presentation. All right, so I think most people have probably used Zoom by now, since we've been using it for quite a number of months to conduct this kind of business. But I'll just go over a quick overview of it for you. So for using Zoom, your microphone is going to be muted until the Q&A. I've just muted everybody as they come in. That's just so there's no background noise and to make it easier for everyone to hear throughout the presentation. Use the chat for questions. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a bar that looks like this and the chat button. You can click on that there. And if you do have questions, just type those into the chat. My colleague, Carly Arbor, who works with me in economic development, she has been very kind to take notes this evening, and she'll be collecting your questions so that we can pull them up the Q&A and answer them then. And if you are finding that your internet is a bit slow, you can turn your video off. Often that helps if you have not a great internet connection. So that's something to do if you're finding it's breaking up or you can't hear very well. I would give that a try. So the Q&A format on Zoom, we'll do it right at the end. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Any question is fine. I'm not, there's no stupid questions. Anything you want to know is great. We have a few questions that have been submitted prior to the session that we'll answer, that people have emailed in. We have questions in the chat box, and you can also have live questions by raising your hand. So I think the first thing we'll do is we'll do the questions submitted to the session, because I've got those in front of me. Then we'll do the questions in the chat, and then at the end, if you want to raise your hand, then you can do that as well. So just for those of you who might not be familiar with raising your hand, I'll just go back here. So if you click on the chat button there, not the chat. If you click on the participants button, when you want to raise your hand, a list of participants will come up on the side, and there'll be a little button that says raise hand. So if you just click on raise hand, it'll pop up and it'll show that you're interested in asking a question, and it'll show up on my screen. So we'll once people are raising hands, we'll get through everybody. All right, so that's sort of the administrative business before we get going. So we'll jump right into some background on heritage conservation districts and conserving cultural heritage. So when people often think of cultural heritage, they usually think of museums or big historic sites, but cultural heritage is really around us all the time, every day in our communities, in the places that we visit and the things that we do. So all that history that shaped our community, so Lindsay in this particular case, it's around us in our own neighborhoods. So it reflects the history and the values of our communities, and our heritage helps define who we are and what we want to keep, share, and pass on to future generations. Now, cultural heritage takes a lot of different forms. So these include built heritage, so buildings and other structures, and this can be everything down to a small home to a gigantic place like the Houses of Parliament. We have cultural heritage landscapes. Once again, these range from our downtowns, battlefields, cemeteries, and even natural landscapes that humans have had contact with. We have our natural heritage, so those would be things like our rivers, our forests, various elements within those that we interact with as a community. We have archaeological sites, which there's quite a number of in Kawartha Lakes and across the province, and those are both our Indigenous archaeological sites, and then also archaeological sites from our early settlement period that we have in our area. There's cultural resource cultural heritage resource collections, which is, I think, what we often think of more often when we're thinking of cultural heritage. So those are museums, archival collections, so places like the Old Jail, Maryborough Lodge, the Boyd Museum. Those are some of our main collections that we have in Kawartha Lakes. There's also intangible heritage, and this is the activities that we do that have been passed on from previous generations. So everything from boat construction, like traditional canoe construction, things like quilting, making jams, music, dance. Those are all different kinds of intangible heritage. And cultural heritage can also be movable or immovable. So movable things would be something like old china or pottery, things that you might find in a museum collection, whereas immovable heritage are things like buildings or structures or landscape features that are staying in place. So heritage conservation districts are a method for conserving cultural heritage. And they're, in Ontario, there's something very specific, and they're regulated under the Ontario Heritage Act. So it's under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act is the designation of heritage conservation districts. And these are areas, neighborhoods, groups of buildings or features, or a landscape which has heritage value because of a variety of interrelated elements. And those interrelated elements can be a wide range of things. Usually in Ontario, those are residential neighborhoods and some of our small town downtowns, but they can definitely be other things as well. So a conservation district designation is a way to help manage change happening within a community that enhances and complements an area's unique character. So all of our historic neighborhoods and downtowns have their own specific character and history, and an HCD is a way to help manage change in that, so it retains that character that makes it unique and special and makes people want to go there. So the designation, administratively, it enables the council of a municipality to manage and guide that future change in the district through the adoption of a district plan, and those have policies and guidelines for conservation, protection, and enhancement of the area's special characters. So a district designation is really a tool that municipalities use to help put a planning framework in place for these special historic places. Now, the significance of HCDs usually extends beyond built heritage, the structures, the streets, and the landscape, and it can also include important vistas and views between and towards buildings, and also in spaces within the district. So in Ontario, and there are conservation districts in other jurisdictions. Some of them are a little bit different. So we'll be talking about the ones in Ontario today. So our first conservation district in this province was created in 1980 in Mississauga. So it's, for those of you who might be familiar with it, it's Meadowvale Village, which is a historic area in the city of Mississauga. At present, on their website, the Ontario Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Culture Industries, which is the new name for sport, tourism, culture, tourism, sport, the name changes all the time. It's the current sports, tourism, and culture ministry. They have 134 approved heritage designation bylaws as of today. Actually, I checked to make sure. So that's as of August 2020. But there are many more conservation district studies, plans, and guidelines that are currently underway across the province, and they run all the way from large studies in Toronto to smaller studies that are going on in our rural communities across the province. And these, as I mentioned before, are a variety of different landscapes. So there's residential areas, there's historic areas with different mixed kinds of buildings, there's industrial and military complexes, and our downtowns. The two most common ones are residential districts and downtown districts. So in Kawartha Lakes, at the moment for our heritage designated properties, we have 81 properties that are designated individually. So they're throughout the municipality, and they're designated based on their individual merits. Most of those actually are in Lindsay at the moment, but there are a number all across our municipality. Some of them date all the way back to the 1970s when they were designated, and we have one that was just designated a few months ago. So that's been an ongoing process for the past 40 years. And we also have 2 heritage conservation districts in Lindsay and in Fenelon Falls, and they were created quite recently in 2017. That being said, we do have many more historic properties and areas that are worthy of recognition and protection. So we have a great number of historic properties here that, that we get to look at and share as we go out throughout our municipality. So in Kawartha Lakes, as I mentioned, we have 2 heritage conservation districts, and they were designated in 2017. So those bylaws were passed in late 2017, and the designation process for those started a couple years previously, around 2015, and they actually went on simultaneously. So they were designated at the same time. So the first one is in downtown Lindsay, which I think a lot of you will be very familiar with, which protects the downtown core along Kent Street, and then down to Peel and Russell Street as well. And it goes from the Academy Theatre and then down to the Armory. And then the other one that we have is a small residential district in Fenland Falls. So that's Oak Street, which you may be familiar with as well. And it has about a dozen residential properties as well as Maryborough Lodge. And so it just runs along the canal along Oak Street with the properties on either side and then Maryborough Lodge at the end. So the question that a lot of people ask is, why do we bother designating conservation districts? And there's a variety of reasons for this. The big one is that it protects important historic buildings and landscapes. So for people who really value history, the local landscapes, it's a way of protecting some of those things that we really like and enjoy about our communities. At the same time, it creates a localized plan for growth and development centered on preserving and enhancing an area's heritage attributes. So as some of you might know, Lindsay is currently growing and probably will continue to do so, at least for the foreseeable future. And in Ontario, we have certain growth plans that we have to follow. And by creating these localized plans, we can make sure that the growth that happens in our communities respects the historic nature of the properties that we have, respects our residential neighborhoods, and it helps create this really unique framework for particular neighborhoods like the Old Mill, so that as we experience growth and intensification, the things that people think are special about their neighborhoods remain the same. It creates design guidelines for construction and development. And especially as new properties are being built. You can see the little cartoon on the side of your screen there. That's a bit of a joke there with the gigantic house in the middle, but it aims to prevent things like that, where you have historic homes being crowded out by newer developments that don't necessarily fit with the character of local areas. It creates an approvals process for change and new construction based on a heritage conservation district plan, which is tailored to the particular area. It helps enhance streetscapes and helps retain attractive neighborhoods, and it promotes local cultural vitality and pride of place. I'm just gonna grab some water here. So there's a few characteristics that all heritage conservation districts do have. All of them are different, but they have these common characteristics that makes them worthy of designation. So this is groups of related buildings, natural forms, structures, and historic features that might form a cohesive neighborhood or a particular pattern. There's a specific local character that's unique to the place. They have a shared and cohesive history and evolution, so you can see those patterns of evolution. There's a history that runs throughout it, and they also have different patterns that you can see in the growth of the areas. Sometimes conservation districts are related to a specific event or person as well. That's not necessarily the case for all of them, but there are some that do have that more specific bent towards a development, say for example, that was spearheaded by a particular local citizen. So the big question I think that most people really want to know is, how does conservation district designation impact your property as a property owner? So it does a few things. So it means for you, a property owner living in your house day to day, maybe wanting to make some changes, it means that certain types of exterior changes will require applying for a heritage permit. And that permit, like applying for a building permit or planning approvals to do various things that you might want to do on your property, it just measures what you want to do based on the criteria in the conservation district plan to ensure that potential work fits with what works for the neighborhood. So you can see this historic house on the side with this very gigantic addition that really does not fit with the historic character. So this is something that heritage permits are trying to steer people away from, so that they can make changes and modernize their property. But at the end of the day, it's enhancing not only their own property, but the local neighborhood as well. That being said, designation does not impact the use of your property. So if you want to change the use of your property, say for example, from a residential to a commercial to run a small business in there, that's something that you can do. designation doesn't impact that, you would simply go through the regular planning process for a rezoning, for example, like you would with any other property if you wanted to change that use. It also doesn't change your property's value. So property assessments and your resale value don't take designation into account. And there's often been, there've been a number of studies that have actually shown that properties that are designated within conservation districts either hold their value better than properties in other areas that aren't designated, or they sell for a greater rate. And part of the reason for that is that the neighborhood itself has this nice, attractive feel that people like. So you end up with that nice neighborhood feel that increases that resale value. And that's particularly the case during economic downturns when maybe prices are going down, although that's not necessarily the case at the moment, as I think we all know with the current housing market. The other thing that you don't have to do is you don't have to restore your home to its original look. So if you have a historic home and it's been changed quite a lot, it has a lot of modern features on the outside, you don't have to restore it back to what it originally looked like. It's really only for making changes in the future. So you can keep your home exactly as it is and it doesn't matter. The designation doesn't aim to prevent change. That's one of the big things I like to stress with people. It's not freezing everything in place like a museum. What it does is it aims to manage it and promote positive changes to buildings and neighborhoods. So this is quite a lengthy slide, and we'll put this up online later so you can have a better look through it. But this is about the heritage permit process. So when designated properties, both those that are designated individually and those as part of conservation districts, when they want to make certain kinds of changes, they have to apply for a heritage permit. So there's no additional fee for heritage permits. So if you apply for a building permit and a heritage permit, there's a set fee for that building permit, and the heritage permit goes along for free with it, which is great. And most of these are reviewed by staff within 3 business days. So the turnaround for these, especially for most of the straightforward things that we get, is very quick. Most things that people submit are absolutely fine, and we sign off and say, great, go ahead, and then they go and get their building permits and they can go ahead with their project. So some of the activities that require permits would be new construction, so either brand new homes or additions, changes to heritage features on your property. So the picture you can see on your screen there, that's a historic property. Actually, it's in Kinmount, where they had taken off the entire front porch, so they did require a permit for that, and they were doing a restoration for that. So they received a heritage permit to do that work. So hard landscaping, such as installing a new driveway, and the demolition of buildings or parts of buildings. So if you're planning on demolishing your entire house, which most people generally are not going to do, or if you're planning on demolishing a rear addition, for example, that would also require a permit. However, most things that you would do day to day as a homeowner, you probably don't need a permit for that. So things like routine maintenance, so repointing brick, fixing your roofing, painting, none of those require permits. Gardening does not require a permit, or any kind of soft landscaping. Installing your eaves troughing or changing that out also doesn't require permitting, or any interior changes. So with conservation districts, there's no regulation on anything you can do inside your home. So if you want to install a brand new modern kitchen, you're absolutely free to do that without having to get any kind of permission on the heritage front. So the goal of this process, as I mentioned before, is not to prevent owners from making the changes that they want to do, but just to ensure that the attributes that make the district important are preserved and enhanced. And design guidelines, so what you can and cannot do, are created as part of the plan process, which comes after the study, and they're done in consultation with the community. So you have the opportunity to provide input on that and talk about some of the things that you want to see preserved in your neighborhood. So we do have financial incentive programs for owners of designated properties. And often people who own designated properties, both individual and ones in heritage conservation districts, are eligible for a variety of grant programs to help with restoration projects on their historic properties. So for example, if you want to restore your historic porch, there is grant money available for you to do that. And that's essentially to incentivize people to do a really good job on those restoration projects and enhance those historic features. So at the moment, Kawartha Lakes has grants for heritage properties through its $1 Million Makeover program. And this program was developed to implement our strategic community improvement plan. So the vast majority of the grants through our CIP are for commercial properties, and the heritage one is for residential properties as well. So if you had a property designated in a conservation district, you would be able to access some of that funding. From time to time, there are other funding opportunities that come available, sometimes from the provincial or federal level. There aren't any at the moment, but they do come about from time to time. All right, so that's basically the background on conservation districts in Ontario, how it works, what's going on in Kawartha Lakes at the moment. So we'll pivot towards the Old Mill Conservation District study, just to give you the background on that and how it came about and what we're going to be doing over the next number of months. So this study was initiated by Council in June 2020. So they endorsed beginning the study at their meeting on June 23rd. And the intention of the study is to look at the Old Mill neighborhood to see if all or part of it should be designated as a heritage conservation district. So how did this come about? So a number of years ago, when the Downtown Lindsay Conservation District study was underway, the area was identified as having historic value at that time and the potential for a conservation district study of its own. This was because it has a lot of historic homes and because of its importance in the history of Lindsay dating back to the 1820s and 30s. In 2018, a delegation was made to Council requesting that the area be made into a district. And at that time, Council sent that back to staff to look into how that would be done and what process we would have to go through in order to make that happen. So staff examined the area and recommended that there were enough historic properties and history that it should be studied as a potential district. So staff presented that to the Municipal Heritage Committee, which examined the recommendation, and they recommended that the study proceed. That recommendation came to Council, and then Council authorized the study in June 2020. So these are just our brief steps to designate a conservation district. And there's a document on Jump In, which I'll show you afterwards, that you can look at, that goes through all these steps so you can see just how we get from the identification of a potential district all the way down to designating it through a bylaw. So the first step is identifying it. Either members of the public, council, staff, the Heritage Committee can recognize an area has that potential and identify it as a possible area for study. The Heritage Committee will take that and make a recommendation to Council as to whether or not the area should be studied. Council then sees that and they either say, yes, go ahead, start the study, or no, we don't think that that area has the potential for future designation. Then the study phase, which is where we're at now, comes about, and that takes about 9 to 12 months. And that's where a thorough study of the history and character of the area is undertaken to see whether or not it really does have that potential for future designation. Throughout that, there's public consultation like we're doing now. So input from various members of the public. So we get that from you, your thoughts, get you to participate, provide input, any information that you might have. Once that study is complete, about a year later, it's presented to Council, and Council looks at the recommendations that are in and the study. If it recommends designation, then Council can decide whether or not to proceed towards a plan phase. So the next thing, which is about 6 to 9 months, a plan is developed, and that's where you have a design guidelines, long-term goals for development, essentially the long-term visioning for this particular neighborhood that's developed through the plan phase. Once again, this is done with public consultation, so people have the opportunity to provide input into that plan and have what they want their neighborhood to look like put into that conservation district plan. After that happens, the plan is presented to Council, and Council proceeds with designation. They pass a designation bylaw, and then the district is created. So overall, it's about a 2-year process from Council endorsing it, getting all the way to the final designation. Sometimes a little bit longer, sometimes a little bit less, just depending on how long the process takes. So the study boundaries, you can see them on your screen here, and this is the map that you received with the notice that was sent out to you. So it's basically a rectangle with a little bit of a rough edge on the one side, and it goes from Durham Street on the south and Lindsay Street south on the west, and then the Scugog River on the other side. So this is the area that was requested as a potential district in the 2018 deputation. And it has some historic significance. It's not just a completely random area. It's the bottom quarter of what was called the Purdy Land Grant. And that was a grant that was made in lots 20 and 21 in Concession 6 in Ops Township in the late 1820s to William Purdy, who constructed the first mill in Lindsay. And this is the bottom quadrant of it, where the majority of the first development in Lindsay took place. One thing that a number of people have asked me is there is a little bite out of it here on the west side. It goes around the Academy Theatre and a couple of other buildings here on Lindsay Street. The reason there's a jog there is that these buildings are already designated as part of the downtown Lindsay Conservation District, and you can't have buildings that are designated under both districts. It's just sort of the way the provincial law works, so we've had to go around them, which is why it looks like there's been a few buildings taken out, and that's the reason. So just a little bit of history on the area for those of you who might be unfamiliar with it. So this area is actually the oldest area in Lindsay. The first settlement and construction took place here, and with the first Purdy's Mill. So William Purdy, he was an early settler in Ops Township. He came from the United States originally, and he received a land grant from the government on the condition that he build a mill on the Scugog River. So he established his mill here between 1828 and 1830. And once he established the mill, because people needed to use those facilities, a settlement grew up around the mill site. So people from the surrounding townships would come. They would have their grain ground into flour, and there was also a sawmill as well. And people started moving into the area and creating a small settlement, and this was called Purdy's Mills. In 1857, when the town of Lindsay was created, this area was incorporated into it, along with the area along Kent Street and the residential areas that eventually sprung up there as a sort of the little residential area to the east that was older than the downtown itself. Throughout the late 19th century and early 20th century, it continued to grow as a residential neighborhood with a lot of industrial development along the river. And that's including the old mill that we have today, and a lot of other industrial buildings that are no longer there. So I've got a few historic photos and maps just to show you, just for some interest, that we've uncovered kind of in the early stages of the study. So this is a map of the study area in 1875. So this is a bird's eye view map. These were done for a lot of communities in Ontario at this time. And you can see where the cluster of development is and where it was in the mid 1870s. So you can see the mill sites along here, some properties along Lindsay Street South. And you can see that the majority of the residential properties are in the northern part of the study district, or the northern part of the study area, and they're starting to move down towards Durham Street as well. And you can also see St. Mary's Church and the old convent that was there as well. So we've just got a few pictures of the Lindsay Old Mill, which I think everyone's probably very familiar with. So this is back before the fire. The St. Mary's Church precinct, which was an extremely important part of the development of this area. So here's the church on the right side of the screen before the spire was constructed, and also before the convent. And then on the other side of your screen, you'll see the church with the spire and the St. Joseph Convent there as well. And this is just a view looking towards the church and the convent in 1880, and you can see how the residential parts of the neighborhood are starting to spring up. So now that we've had a quick look at the basic history of the area, I'll just go through what's in the Conservation District study itself. So this Conservation District study, there are requirements that we have to have under the Ontario Heritage Act. They set out a number of things that we have to do. So those things are the history of the area. We have to do a property survey and inventory. We have to place the study within its local policy context. We have to undertake community engagement. And we have to make recommendations as to whether or not all or part of the area should be designated, and also the proposed boundaries of where that future designation should be. All right, so the area history is usually one of the first things that's done, just to understand that background. So this is a comprehensive history of the area from pre-settlement up until the present day. So before Purdy was there, any Indigenous use of the site, if there were explorers or anybody coming through on the Scugog, we look for evidence of that. Looking at the first settlement, its growth into a small a small residential area, division into lots and blocks, and then just right up how it developed all the way to the 21st century. So we see general patterns of settlement, important events that happened, key industries, which is particularly important in this area because we know we have quite a few of them along the river, notable residents, and any major changes that occurred. The next thing that we do is a property survey and inventory. So this is a visual survey and documentation of every property in the study area. So this is essentially done on foot, where we walk around and take a picture of the buildings and document them. So we know exactly what's in the study area to make some of those recommendations and assessments when the study's put together. So we look for different building styles, height, massing, decorative features, cladding and material, landscaping. Those are the kinds of things we look for in the property survey and the inventory. We also include documentation of important views. So say, for example, views of St. Mary's Church when you're looking down Russell Street. Natural features such as the river, open spaces, a whole variety of things, looking to see what that character of the neighborhood is and how it's put together. From that information, we do something called a character analysis, and this is an analysis of how the area evolved into what it looks like today. So we're looking for prevalent building forms, dates of construction, patterns of development, views, routes, natural features, a whole variety of things. You can see on the maps here on the screen, these are taken from a conservation district study that was done in Peterborough. So here's a map that was done of massing types, a map of houses with porches and verandas. If we flip to the next slide, this is one of the different styles of the buildings in this particular neighborhood. So doing this character analysis, we often use mapping for this, so we can see what the patterns are. If you see on a map that there's a huge cluster of buildings that were all built in the 1850s in one area, you can see where that pattern of growth happened. Or if you have a huge area where it's mostly 19th century buildings and a cluster of buildings that, say, for example, are from the 1960s that don't fit with everything else, when you're putting those boundary recommendations together, you can exclude that section of 1960s buildings because they don't fit within the general character of the area when looking at preserving its history. So the next thing is a policy analysis, and this is an analysis of city policy, federal and provincial legislation, and the relationship to the proposed development of a district in the area. So there's a lot of different policy pieces we look at as part of this. So the Ontario Heritage Act is the big one, which is the guiding piece of legislation for heritage planning in Ontario. The Provincial Policy Statement and the Planning Act, which also guides how we preserve properties and also undertake land use planning in general in the province. The Growth Plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. This is the growth plan that we have to follow in terms of intensification and growth within the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And in Lindsay, we're in the outer ring of that growth area, so it's something we really need to look at. Our official plan, so the City of Kawartha Lake's official plan, there's policies in there about heritage conservation and also about conservation districts. Our zoning bylaw to see how the historic buildings fit within the rules that we have for zoning, and also our cultural master plan. There's a whole bunch of other things that we look at as well. Those are just kind of the key ones there. And this policy analysis is to see whether or not the conservation district designation fits with policies and some of the legislation we have to follow, and also whether or not we as a city have to make policy changes in order to have that district designated and fit within our overall plans for development and growth. So the next thing that is determined after we do particularly the character analysis, is where the boundaries of a potential conservation district might be. So the study makes that recommendation, and it's not always where the study area is. So they look at patterns of development, as I mentioned, where there might be concentration of historic properties, natural constructed barriers, so the river is a very good example, different roads may be also one, and where that cohesive historic landscape exists. So within a study area, if you have one area that's very clearly historic and another area that just isn't, by doing that character analysis, you can see that that one area should really be excluded from the boundaries. So I've got, oh, there you go. I've got two maps here. This is for a conservation district that's currently in development in Toronto. Along the Humber River, and on the one side here, you can see the one on the left has, this is the study area for this district that was started a couple of years ago, and the actual recommended boundaries, you can see they took a big bite out of the one side of it. So these properties here that seem to have these smaller lots, the study found that they really were not cohesive with the rest of the area. So when it was eventually recommended for designation, that area was removed and only this other historic area along the river was recommended to create a district plan for. And that's something we really can't determine until the study is in place. So then there's some final recommendations that are included in the study as well. So should all or part of the area be designated? That's really the big question that we're asking and trying to answer with the study. What should the boundaries be? What is the historical significance of the area and the objective of designation? And will changes be required to municipal policy? So those are the 4 recommendations that we need to address in the report that council will read and make a decision as to whether or not to proceed with designation of the area. So one of the things that is really important in conservation district studies is community involvement. So I can do tons of historic research and I will never know the community as well as the people who live there. So it's very important for you to give your input. Let me know what's important about your neighborhood that you want to see preserved, and participate in some of the things that we have going. So we have some surveys that we're putting out, historical research, and also a community advisory group that people can join. And one of the places that we're really doing a lot of this is on our Jump In page. So this is the online engagement platform that the city uses. And you can get it through the city website. So it's available on here. There's a link to Jump In. And here we go. I will give you a little tour of it as well, since we haven't been using it for too long, and most people probably haven't used it before. So this is where we have surveys. We have an interactive map that you can participate in. We'll also put information as the study progresses up there. So all the slides and notes from this presentation will go up there, and also general resources that might be helpful for you to learn more about conservation district designation as well. And when the study is drafted, there'll also be a draft up there as well, so people can read it before it goes to council as we tweak it and get that final copy going. So I'm just gonna click on this and hopefully it opens. I will give you a little tour of Jump In, maybe. Yes, okay. Great. Hopefully everybody can see that. All right, so this is our page on Jump In, on the Kawartha Lakes Jump In page. So if you go to the main one. Yep.
Sorry to interrupt you. I think you just need to share your screen view.
Oh, is it not showing up? Okay, hold on. I will. Thank you, Carly. All right, let's. Is that better?
It's just loading.
It's thinking. Okay, there. Great, awesome. Thank you. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so we will just go to the main Jump In page just so you can see what it looks like. All right, so this is Jump In Kawartha Lakes. We have a whole bunch of different engagement opportunities here at the moment. So one of the big things that's going on is the Economic Recovery Task Force, so people can go into that. The recycling one that's going on, and also our Conservation District development. So this will be on here for the duration of the study, so you can participate in it. So if you go into it and it loads, you can see there's a range of resources here. So there's the news feed, which will give you any updates will be put in here so you can have a look at them. We have a number of surveys that you can participate in, which are under here. So there's one about your property, general owners and residents survey that you can participate in, a community advisory group sign up, which I'll touch on later, a historical research group, and a canopy survey group. You can sign up for either of those on here. We also have an interactive map, which you can add points on. So if we go to the map, so what we're looking for here is what places are important to you in the district. So you can drop pins on here and talk about some of the things that maybe have happened, buildings that are really important to you. So you can do this, you can add a pin. So an important place, you can just drag and drop. So there's St. Mary's Church. So you can just drop that on there. You can add an image, you can add a comment. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. I'll just X out of this. Okay, there we go. There's also some widgets on the side you can have a look at. So if you'd like to subscribe to updates for the project, so we'll be sending out email blasts every once in a while, but when our next community meetings are, any particular updates that you might want to know about, so you can subscribe to that through here. There's photos, some FAQs you can read, a variety of documents, so the boundaries, the process flow chart that I mentioned, variety of reports, so those will go up there. Some links where you might get some more information, and also some key dates. So these sessions are up there at the moment. One thing about Jump In that you should know is that in order to leave comments, participate in the surveys, you do have to register for it, and it's the way that the site is set up. You just need an email address to register, and you can do that straight from here. There's a little video on how to do it, and it's very straightforward. And the reason they do that is just so random people don't spam it. That's why they ask you to register. All right. So that's Jump In there. If you're using it and are having any questions about it, feel free to send me an email, and I can help you out with that if you need that. All right, I'm gonna flip back to the PowerPoint. So I will. There we go. All right, if that doesn't show up, Carly, you can let me know. We should be back on the PowerPoint.
Perfect. Yep.
Great. Good. Oh, technology. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. All right. So surveys, as I mentioned, there's the 2 surveys, so feel free to participate in those. That's just to get some information that'll inform the study. One thing I should mention about the surveys and all of our other information and forms and various signups, if you don't feel comfortable using Jump In, if you don't want to register for it, I can provide you with alternate copies. I can email them to you. I can mail you a paper copy. That's fine. Just reach out to me and I can get that alternate format for you if you're more comfortable with that. It's not a problem. So the next thing that we have is that I'd like to talk to you about is a community advisory group. So most conservation districts that are created have a community advisory group, and this is a smaller group outside of our main public engagement sessions for community members to provide more detailed feedback about the study as it progresses. So we can have discussions. If there's something that's been missed in the historic research, it's a great place for people to bring it up. If there's concerns that the community is having, also a great place to bring it up. So this is for people who want to be a little bit more involved in the study process. So it's up to 12 members that we can have just to keep it a little bit of a manageable size. And we'll meet several times throughout the study to discuss how it's going and to provide feedback. And you can apply for the group either on Jump In, there's a sign up form there, or on there's a paper form as well, which I can send to you if you're interested in participating in that and you don't want to use Jump In, that's no problem. We do have two other groups that we're forming, which are a little bit more informal if you want to participate in the study, but you don't necessarily have a lot of time to participate in the community advisory group, or you want to do something a little bit more fun, I guess. So we're looking for some interested community members to undertake research on individual properties. So there's a lot of properties in the study area, and it'd be great if people are really interested in doing some historic research. If they could do some of that, that's absolutely fantastic. So we're looking for things like dates of construction, notable residents, interesting stories, historic photos. And if this is something you're interested in, that's great. You can also sign up on Jump In, or you can email me. Doesn't matter which one. And it can take as much or as little time as you want. If you just want to do some research on your own house, fantastic. If you want to do your entire block, great. Whatever you feel you have time for and what you want to do. Oh, I don't know where that slide went. I'm missing a slide, which I will just describe to you. So we're also doing a canopy survey research group. And so one of the things about this area that makes it really unique is the amount of canopy and tree cover in it. So we're trying to document what kind of tree species are in the district, where they are, how that vegetation cover works within the area, to see how it informs the natural landscape, especially along the river. So if you're interested in doing this kind of natural vegetation survey, same kind of thing. It can take as much or as little time as you have. You can document the trees on your own property, whole block, the whole way along the river, whatever you want, and you can sign up for this same way as the historic research group as well. So we're really looking for anybody who's keen to do a little bit of that that canopy work to join in there as well. Okay. So this is our study timeline, just so you know how things are going to go for the next year. So this is just for the study. This isn't including the plan phase, which we won't even look at until the study is done and some recommendations are made. So, I mean, the first thing, which is not on here, is council's endorsement, which happened in June. So the study is just beginning now. Once we've got all those background pieces together, so letting people know, setting up some of the public engagement. So our first community engagement session is this evening, and our second one will be next week. So throughout fall 2020, that's when those property surveys will happen. They'll probably happen around October. Likely any of the canopy work, surveying, seeing where all those trees are, that'll happen in September when there's still leaves on the trees. So it's a bit easier to tell what's what. And we'll also be doing historic research throughout that time. So in November or December of this year, we'll have our second community engagement meeting, and we'll have some information sharing, just what's come out of the property surveys and research. And we'll also have some more interactive activities as well for you to participate, to get your input and feedback and information on your neighborhood. In winter 2020 and winter 2021, so December through into February, the research, we'll be working on the research then, more historic research, and that's also when the policy work and the character analysis will be done after those property surveys are complete. Likely around February 2021, maybe into March. That's when we'll start preparing the draft study. And then around the end of March, early April, that draft study will be prepared and published for comment. So you'll be able to see that. We'll be publishing it on Jump In, so you can look through that draft study. There'll be a chance to make comments on those. And then in April 2021, we'll have our third community engagement meeting. And a lot of that will be going through the draft study, talking about people's comments, maybe things they'd like to see, some things they have questions about, going through the recommendations to talk about how those came about. Once our community engagement session goes through that draft, it'll be revised and finalized in May, throughout that period, and then it'll likely be presented to council in June 2021. And then if there's recommendations to potentially designate, then we will go on to the plan phase. If we don't find through the study that there's an area that should be designated, that's it. So the study doesn't necessarily mean that an area will be designated. It doesn't mean that all of it will be designated, but those recommendations will come out of the research and property surveys that we do. Okay, so my contact information is here. I think everybody has it from the notices that were sent out, but if you do have any questions that you want to ask after the session, if you want different formats of some of the forms or the surveys or feedbacks that we have, you can touch base with me. So you can either touch base by phone or by email. One thing I am telling people is that at the moment, I think as most of you know, most office staff at the city are working partially in and partially out of the office. So if you just get the answering machine, it probably means that I'm out of the office that day. Please leave a message and I will get back to you. So if you get the voicemail, do leave a voicemail and I'll follow up with you for sure. All right, so that is it for the presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we will flip back to the regular. All right, there we go. So, okay, I've just got everything set up here so I can see what's All right, great. So Carly's putting those questions from the chat into somewhere I can read them, which is great. So I'll be answering those in a second. There are a few questions that we received ahead of time that I'll just answer now. So the first question that we had received by email was, what does heritage designation do for my property? So how does it affect the use of my property? And that's something we talked about in the slideshow, but just as a reminder, in terms of the use of your property, it can be residential, it can be commercial use, it doesn't really matter. It's in terms of those exterior physical changes. Some things will require heritage permits to ensure that new construction, additions, changes stay within basically the district plan and guidelines, and we keep that historic character in the neighborhood. The next question that we had gotten on email was about property values. So we had talked about that as well. So the property values, they're not going to go down, which is great. Obviously, no one wants their property value to go down, but designation doesn't affect your property value. Sometimes it does indeed make it go up. There's a number of studies that are available that discuss that. And actually, I will put those up on Jump In because I know that some people are quite interested in seeing how that designation plays with the potential for property value changes. But in general, properties in districts perform very well on the market when they're sold. And then the next question was about insurance, actually. So the question was, will the designation affect property insurance? So no, it doesn't. So there's a lot of questions about designation and insurance just in general in the heritage world. And the Insurance Bureau of Canada has confirmed 100% that designation does not mean your insurance premiums should go up. We always encourage people who own historic properties, whether they're designated or not, to shop around for a good insurance broker and someone who actually understands how to insure historic properties, because not all insurance companies do in general, but the fact that it's designated won't affect your insurance premiums. All right, so we have a question from the chat. Okay, great. So the question is, some of the older trees in the area seem to be deteriorating. Would the Conservation District study see if these trees are safe? If not, who takes them down? So if there are trees that we see that are unsafe in the district, those will be flagged. If they're on private property, that would be the responsibility of the property owner. If they are on public property, then that would actually end up being something that we would let our city staff know who do that. But yes, if there are unsafe trees that we see doing the canopy survey, definitely something that would be flagged, because even if they are older and part of that historic canopy, unsafe trees, well, they need to go, essentially. All right, are there any other questions in the chat? Great, yes, so feel free to enter them there. If you'd rather ask your questions, so will we plant trees? So no, we won't be planting trees as part of the study. We're just seeing what's there. Just so we know what that canopy cover is as part of the general overall character of the district. If you would prefer to ask questions verbally, you can feel free to raise your hand. I will see that on the side of my screen and I'll unmute you and you can ask the question then as well. Okay, is the city looking into cleaning up the old mill site? It's full of garbage. Yeah, so okay, so all right, so so the old mill site, that is something that we will look at part of the study. The garbage issue, that's something that's dealt with by our parks maintenance staff. That's the garbage itself is kind of outside the scope of the study. One thing that I would like to look at in the study is potential ideas for what to do at that site. That is something that's been discussed in the past by various committees and individuals. So certainly something that would be great to discuss as part of the study, and any resultant plan would be some suggestions and long-term plans for that old mill site. So maybe it can be used for something better in the future. Okay, so the next question that's there, what happens, oh, hold on, with weeds that have grown to be trees on a property, will the owner have to cut them down? No, we're not making anybody cut their trees down. If that's something you would like to cut down, that's your prerogative in that particular case. With the trees at the moment, we're really just looking to see what's there. Okay, how can you ensure that you get input from the majority of property owners and tenants in the study area? So that's the reason why we're having our public consultation meetings. We've sent out notices to everyone who owns properties in the study area, and have asked for people who have tenants to let their tenants know. We're going to be holding more meetings than just this one, so hopefully more people can participate. We'll be publishing them as much as possible. I hope that other people do participate, because we do want as much community participation as possible. At the end of the day, I hope that the majority of people do participate, but everyone has the information, so hopefully they will get involved. Okay, so the next question that we have is regarding historical research. Will the town allow access or pay for using the online land registry system to establish property dates and history? So often we can get access to that for this kind of study, so that those arrangements can be made. We do have access for a municipal heritage committee to do that, so we can make those arrangements for people doing historic research. So the next question, oh, Lori, I see your hand, so I'll get to you momentarily. We'll just, so Michael's question here is, how strict is the heritage permit in regards to addition? So future plan for us is to add a garage and update siding of the house. So adding a garage is fine. So we, even with our individually designated properties, people add garages. There's just some design guidelines that we ask people to do. So for example, we get people to set it back so it's not taking away from the historic house, you know, not having monstrous, gigantic garages that take up their entire back of their property. Certainly having those garages is okay. It's just making sure that that design fits, and the same with updating siding as well. I'm just going to get Lori to ask her question here. So I'm just going to unmute you, and then Gordon, I'll get to you next.
Unmute. Can you hear me?
I can, yep.
Okay, so my question is, there's several properties down in this area that are potentially tear down properties that aren't fixable. So if it passes and it becomes a heritage designated area and you purchase one of those properties, would you be actually allowed to tear it down and rebuild? And would there be certain restrictions to rebuilding? Yeah,
so sorry, I'm just going to mute you again just so to make sure there's no background noise there. If a property is a tear down, those are all done on an individual basis. So if somebody purchases a property, they'd like to tear it down and build something new, they would apply for that demolition permit, and we would look at it. If it was granted to go ahead, for example, if it was structurally unsound, that's, you know, that happens for sure, and tear it down, then they would have to follow the guidelines that were in the district plan. So district plans all have guidelines for new construction, so making sure that you aren't building something that really does not fit within the district. New construction is certainly allowed in that situation if there's a vacant lot and somebody wants to build there, but there are those guidelines for that new construction to make sure that it's not something really crazy, basically. Okay, so we'll just Great. So historical archives. So this is from Gordon. So what historical archives exist in Lindsay on properties? So the historical archives that we have, one of the best sources actually are public library. So they have quite a lot of genealogical information and information just about the town in general, things like city directories, different maps that have information on property. The Old Jail Museum also has information as well. The other two sources are big sources are actually in Peterborough, but do have information on Lindsay and Kawarth Lakes. One of them is at Trent University, which has a very large archives that relates to Lindsay and Kawarth Lakes in general. And then also at the Trent Valley Archives, which is a small private archives just in the north end of Peterborough, and they have quite a bit of information there as well. So for people who were interested in participating in our historical research group, we would facilitate you getting access to those collections so that you can go and do that research. Okay, so our next question is from Zach. So I have extensive research already in the Old Mill area, individuals living there. Who do I contact to give the information to? So you can just email that to me. That would be great. You can send me an email and we can discuss that, or you can give me a phone call, either one. So I'd be the best person to contact with that. And you'll have my contact information through the public notice, and then also on the slide and on Jump In, and then on our website as well. So feel free to reach out. That would be awesome. Okay, great. All right, are there any other questions that people have? We don't have a huge group this evening, so, oh, Lori, I will just ask you to unmute there.
Sorry, I'm on an iPad, so it's easier.
That's okay.
So I know how long the process takes to do the study, but if the study is approved, how long does it take for the designation to go into effect?
So yeah, so once the study is done, so that's about a year, then the district plan is written. So there's a whole other step, which is creating those design guidelines, the objectives for the district, those sorts of things. So usually writing the plan takes about 6 to 9 months. I would say 9, just to, it always takes longer because it always takes longer than you think it is. And then it goes to council, council reviews that. So it's probably about a year before the designation takes effect, after the study is complete, if council decides to go ahead with it. Okay, so for Michael, are you going to need to access properties, or is your survey conducted from the street? So the whole survey, all the survey we do is from the road allowance, so we don't enter onto anybody's private property while we're doing the survey. So we do as much as we can from the street, so we don't need access to anyone's property. We're not going to be going onto your property, so it's all done. It'll all be done from the sidewalk in this case. So from Gordon, so regarding the canopy, do funds exist to cover hiring an arborist? Not at this time. I'm reaching out to Fleming to get some support through there. This conservation district is on a very low budget, so we probably won't be able to hire an arborist. That's one of the reasons why we're doing the canopy study. For anyone who is interested in doing that canopy survey, we'll be aiming to run a training session just so you know what to look for. But we are doing it very much on a volunteer basis. Okay, so this is just from Zach, and this is good for people to know just in general. So he says, for anyone wanting to do historical research at Trent, I've been in touch with the archivist there recently, and they're not accepting in-person visits, nor do they have access to the information from home. At this time, they're unsure when they'll actually open, just an FYI, so that's great, thanks for that. A lot of archives are slowly opening, so we're hoping that a lot of things will be open in the winter. If archives are closed and we can't access that information, we'll just have to sit and wait, just so everyone is aware on some of that historical research. It might extend the study in terms of time frame. Okay, from Gordon, in the 1970s, Allison Warner did a detailed historic home survey for the town. Do you have these records? No, we don't. Is the simple answer to that. If you know where that is, it would be great to know where those are. We have a lot of records from that time period that are not accessible because they're from the old LAC Acts, and sometimes things from before amalgamation disappear into the abyss, particularly with regard to the old heritage work that was done. So if you do know where that is, that'd be absolutely fantastic to know about. Okay, so the next question from Michael, will traffic survey be a part of the conservation survey? More cars, parking, etc. Generally, a traffic survey is not part of the conservation district study. One thing we do look at is where there are parking lots, where there's parking spaces, just so we know, areas where there's on-street parking, areas where there's off-street parking, and that forms part of the study. One thing that we do often do, and we'll probably do this at the next community engagement meeting, is we do a number of mapping type exercises where people can provide input about where some of those routes are that people take, where the busy streets are, but we don't do a specific traffic survey in terms of what they might do for a new development. But we do look at where cars are parked, what routes people take, and that's something that we really need community input for, because that's not necessarily something we would know if you're not living in the district, which you would know better than we do as staff who don't necessarily live in the district area. So the next one is from Gordon. Are you aware of the fire insurance map of the town from the 1940s? Yeah, so we have quite a number of fire insurance maps that we have access to, and that's definitely something we'll be using as part of the research. So there's ones from the 1890s, and then also from going all the way up into the 1940s. Yeah, we just had a quick question. So is next week's meeting the same as this one? Yes, it's exactly the same meeting, same presentation. There might be some different questions and answers at the end, but it's exactly the same content. So we will have our next meeting, so the one we'll be holding later in the fall, so that would be probably around November, early December. It'll be different, and there'll be some more engaging activities where you can provide more input as opposed to just a presentation and Q&A. So another question, will we be receiving a copy of your slides from tonight? Yeah, so you can, I can actually send a link out so that everybody can have a look through the slides. They'll also be available on Jump In, and then also on our city website. So I'm happy to send a link out to everybody so that you can click on that and go through the slides as well. Will the future meeting invites be sent by mail? Yes, I think we'll probably end up doing that. Especially because everything is a little bit complicated right now in terms of safety with meetings and having various drop-in information things. We're going to be sending everything out by mail. We'll also send email blasts out. We'll do the press release like we did this time. But yeah, we're going to send everything out in the mail to make sure that everybody is getting it. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to ask this evening? If you do think of anything after the meeting is done, feel free to send me a quick email, and I'm happy to answer it individually. Or if you want to have a discussion on the phone, that's great as well. I'm happy to do that for any questions you might have. All right, we'll just give it a minute in case anybody thinks of anything else. I'll just say before we end things tonight, thanks very much for participating this evening. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you at future meetings, and you participate in some of our surveys and engagement groups as well. If you do have any additional questions, as I mentioned, feel free to get a hold of me, and I'll look forward to touching base with you about the study in future. Great. I think. Oh, well, and yeah, thanks everyone for coming out. This has been good, and for all your questions as well. So just as a reminder, all this will be available so you can look at it again later. Next week's presentation is going to be the same content, so you probably don't want to watch it again. Yeah, so that's it, and have a great evening, everyone. So we'll just if you all want to log off, that would be great. Okay, I'm gonna end things.